Welcome back to the Code Ryan podcast. Today, Elliott joins me and we're going to discuss AI, Next.js, and some other web development related topics. But before we get to that, Elliott, could you maybe just give me a rundown of what your kind of tech journey has looked like so far?
Thanks, Ryan, for hosting me on this podcast. So I'm currently 18 years old. I'm based in Singapore. I'm studying in the Singaporean high school. So I guess I started coding around 2 years ago, back when I was 16. And what really got me started was CS50. I mean, even a few years back, like maybe 4 years back, I started exploring things like Scratch, making games on the MIT Scratch platform, and actually got a lot of fun out of that. Yeah, but then 2 years ago, it was when I started taking coding seriously through Harvard's CS50 course. And basically, it was like, after the CS50 course, I went to their focus pathways. So CS50 had a web dev pathway and also an AI pathway. So I took both of that, right, just to really explore what's out there in the computer science world. And so I started building Django applications, and I fell in love with AI visualizations like pathfinding algorithms, neural networks, right? And then I basically used this visualization library called P5.js, which allows me to use the Canvas API to actually run visualizations. So I actually really love that part about programming. Then I delved deep into web development a year back, started following tutorials on the MERN stack, Mongo, Express, React, Node.js. And then throughout that, I explored technologies like TypeScript, Nextjs, TRPC recently. And it's just like a lot of random side projects that I like to throw in. So if you go to visit my GitHub, I have over 100 repositories. It's just like experiments. I love experimenting with code. So about a year ago at 17, I started playing around with React Native, even developing mobile apps and stuff like that. And I guess it's 3 months back, I started making coding tutorials, exploring into large language models and their APIs. And I guess that's how we ended up here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of found you through your YouTube channel. I mean, you've, for only being on YouTube for, I think, a few months now, you've had some pretty good success here so far. And like, you're 18 years old. Like, I think you have a really bright future ahead of you. And I think it's really cool that you kind of found CS50, as those were some of my kind of favorite courses that I went through as I was kind of learning to code. Like the main instructor in that, I forget his name now. I think it's like Milan or something like that, but he is amazing at what he does. And honestly, all their instructors are really good. I remember taking those web development courses when I started out and would highly recommend those for anybody just like wanting to kind of get their feet wet in web development and kind of learn about it. I think that those courses kind of lay a really, really nice foundation there. But kind of with that, Elliott, you've mentioned a lot of different topics here regarding, React Native, artificial intelligence, web development. Where are you at currently with like, what's kind of your favorite area right now? Do you prefer web development? Do you like the kind of AI neural network side of things, or where do you kind of see your future? Do you just like kind of experimenting right now, and whatever you end up liking best is what you like best?
I guess you bring up a good point about CS50 and the course instructor. And so I think it's important to actually explore all areas of computer science before deciding on one. So regarding my current interest, it's really about AI, I guess, and also web development, and basically combining web development and AI together. So with new technologies like large language models like GPT, DALL-E, it really opens up a world of possibilities with the kind of applications you can build and the kind of problems you can solve. And that's really the power of AI in this current age. It's open to anyone and everyone who's willing to learn, right? It's no longer an obscure theoretical topic that you need a PhD to actually start using AI about. So yeah, I think it's a natural journey for me to end up here in AI. And that's how I got my YouTube channel started. It's a joint between AI and web development.
I think that's really good advice, to explore a bunch of different areas and just see what you kind of gravitate towards. As I know when I first started out, I learned like just a general programming language. I started with Python and then started kind of working with that. And then I gravitated more towards like web development, mobile development. And I really like user interface development, developing stuff that I can like actually see and play around with. But I also think AI is pretty cool and really awesome. And I think that, when I was maybe starting out, that felt super distant to me, like, I need like a mathematics degree or something like that. But I think, like you said, that has become kind of more democratized, so to speak, to where more and more people can kind of access it through your YouTube channel and different things like that. And kind of on the AI subject, I know that you're kind of new to it and you're still kind of starting out here, but I think if people are listening to you, like you're 18 years old, you're definitely a smart guy. So I'd be interested in like what your take is on kind of the state of artificial intelligence and developers. Like where do you see that going? How do you think artificial intelligence is going to impact developers? I know some people are kind of worried about AI maybe taking developers' jobs, or where are you kind of feeling with the whole space of AI these days?
I like the word that you use, democratize. It's a really interesting concept because, yeah, as I say, AI was a niche concept, but now it has been brought to everyone's attention, and any newbie could start learning about the APIs and start building applications with it. So regarding the current state of AI, I think at the current state, it's still considered early. I mean, there are definitely solutions that is promising that, in a few years' time, we're going to take over developers' job. But at the end of the day, I think coding and software engineering in general is about understanding the business context of the problem you're trying to solve. And so it's about solving problems, and ultimately you still need humans to make the critical decisions, and AI is only there to help you achieve those decisions. So it might be able to take over developers whose job is mainly like coding, but they're not making any decisions. I think that could be replaced in the future, but to those who are deep into the business context, those will never be replaced because you're ultimately solving a real world problem that AI can't do.
Yep, absolutely. I think that we're probably going to get to a point to where AI gets pretty good at like writing the code based on a certain problem, and maybe a developer's job is going to be more so working with AI, and kind of it's more of an augmented developer to where AI helps them write the code, but the developer still has to kind of guide it. And like you said, you still need that person to understand the business context on why you need to solve a problem, what problems need to be solved, and everything that kind of goes into that. So I'm very much so with you there. And one maybe other question on AI for someone maybe that's also new to it and looking to get started with it. Would you recommend it sounds like you would recommend going through maybe finding the hardware courses on AI and going that route, or what would you recommend maybe for someone getting started with it?
Yeah, so I think there's two train of thoughts here. AI in the sense of, are you trying to practically use it right now, or are you truly interested in the theory behind it? Because AI under the hood is a lot of mathematics, right? So if you're truly interested in how AI works under the hood, my suggestion would be to take the CS50 AI course, because it's a very good course to get your feet into the water. It introduces you to a lot of both mathematical terms and also like the theory behind neural networks and how this large language model works. But I mean, in other way, if you really just want to start building with AI, you can just explore tutorials, explore the OpenAI documentation, hit some points, get back some suggestions from the AI, and go forward with that. So I guess it's ultimately part of how interested and which kind of pathway you want to take at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice. And with a lot of your courses, you've also used Next.js, and like you said, you've kind of gravitated towards the MERN stack. And I'd be curious, is there a particular reason why you kind of chose Next.js for a lot of your courses? Is that maybe just kind of the popular framework and you went that route, or why did you kind of decide to go the Next.js route with things?
Yeah, so I mean, Next.js is something quite new to me, honestly. Also, I started with React and Django last time, then eventually I switched to something like React and Express. But I feel like when it comes to Next.js, the beauty of it is the developer experience, because from the start of the project, it helps you set up everything from the front end to the back end. All the code is there for you to immediately start coding and immediately start solving problems. And also you can write both your backend and front-end code in one project and easily deploy it to a service like Vercel with just a single click. Deployment used to be so hard. You have to understand servers, or maybe you have to understand how certain things work on the platform. But with platforms like Vercel, it makes it so easy. Anyone can do it, right? And because it's serverless, it scales infinitely. Like, there's just, the barrier to entry is so low for using Next.js right now. And so I like the coupling mechanism also with technologies like gRPC. Using TypeScript on both the front and back end makes development super fun and easy. And that's where actually Next.js really shines.
Yep, I also really like the developer experience with Next.js. It gives you a lot of kind of nice structure out of the box. And, before Next.js, I used Create React App a lot. And with that, like, you install, but then you also have to set up a router. You might have to, manually configure TypeScript and manually set up Tailwind CSS. But with Next.js, you could just use, npx create next app at latest, answer a few prompts, and then everything is kind of configured and structured for you really nicely to where you can get up and running with the technologies you want to use in the matter of, honestly, just seconds. And like you said, you can also connect your Next.js project to Vercel, and every time you push to the main branch, you can automatically deploy that project in a matter of seconds as well. So I think the developer experience of that is definitely hard to beat.
Yeah, exactly. Makes it so easy, automatic CI/CD built in. I don't think you have a better developer experience when it comes to web dev in the current age.
Yep, it's definitely my preferred framework of choice right now. There's still some other ones I definitely need to experiment with to see how I like them, but yeah, I'm definitely a fan of Next.js. So kind of with that, are there particular features of Next.js that you really like? Like, I know you mentioned that you like how it's kind of integrated with a lot of different things and the developer experience is good. Or maybe in other words, are there other kind of like core concepts of Next.js that you think are important to understand, or just kind of any general things like that?
Yeah, I think Next.js is a special framework in the sense that it's a very full stack centric framework, similar to something like Django. It's like batteries included. So I guess the important thing to understand about Next.js is you have to understand deeply the relationship between the clients and the server, right? So with the release of Next.js 13, their newest version, and also with the release of React Server Components, there's almost like a shift in mindset nowadays from the client back to the server. So it's like coming back to the old days like Django server-side rendering, Ruby on Rails, PHP, where you're rendering a lot of the logic and HTML on the backend before sending the template back to the front end. Yeah, so a lot of single-page applications, like you mentioned, Create React App, was built as a client-centric application, right? But moving these resources and moving your mindset from the client to the server is actually quite a good paradigm shift, as then you can offload the rendering process to the server and allow better user experience on rendering and like on lower-end devices. Yeah, so I think it's really crucial that people have the understanding of what the client is, what the server is, and how Next.js plays a part in handling that for you.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's maybe one of the biggest kind of mental shifts here as of late with the latest versions of Next.js, to where now you kind of are thinking server components first, and then you kind of need to opt in to client components at a certain point of time. And I think this is pretty similar to how other frameworks, like I believe Astro is one, to where they use this concept of islands, in which everything is kind of server side, but they use these kind of client side islands from time to time. And in Next.js, it's kind of similar to where now with the new kind of app router and server components, you're thinking server components first, but then you have to opt in to the use client or using client components when you kind of want to do that. And when kind of making this shift, is there any like common things to look out for or anything like that when thinking about client versus server components? Like, I know for me, one thing that was kind of tricky to start is like a lot of packages that I would used to use in React.js, that they're just JavaScript packages meant for the front end. I would start using those in Next.js, and now that it switched to server components, those wouldn't work. So I had to like do some configuration there. So that was kind of took me some getting used to. Or is there anything like that kind of occurred for you when using the latest version of Next.js?
Yeah, I think it definitely happens because it has been like 2, 3, 4, 5 years of people posting React content, and all of these React content up until now were very client-centric, so they talk about hooks and stuff, and there was never really server-side rendering discussed during these React tutorials. So I guess it's hard as a beginner if you come into a tutorial and then you see a tutorial from 4 years ago and you try to apply it to the current frameworks right now, you might run into a lot of issues. So that's actually why I started the channel, to actually educate people on this big paradigm shift that's coming to web development and in the future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you also have a video on state management in Next.js and in React as well. And I think that is particularly difficult. I mean, to this day, even for me with a handful of years of experience, state management can be one of the kind of trickier areas in web development, whether you're managing state on the server or the client or in local storage or in kind of global state in your React app. Like, there can be a lot of moving parts when it comes to managing the state of your application. So kind of with that, what is like currently your preferred way of state management? I know you mentioned you've kind of also gone through several different kind of ways to do it with context and Redux and different things like that, but what's kind of your preferred way that you've kind of landed on at this point?
state management is one of the most important topics in web development, right? So like, I guess it's important to understand, are we talking about server or client state? So client state refers to things like whether a switch has been toggled, whether someone has like collapsed a menu or not. I think that is trivial, and you can use the normal use state hook in React. But when we talk about state management with like things like Redux, use context, use reducer, we're usually talking about syncing your server state to the client state. So your server state are things like your database roles, and you're making a call to fetch the database roles and try to store it temporarily in a client state for you to render. And so it's important to actually understand, it's so important to understand the relationship between client and server, because then you can use things like React Query, which is my preferred way of doing anything state related, because if you set up your project properly, if you understand the relationships properly, React Query can actually really handle basically all your state management needs, and you will never really need to use things like Redux anymore. So yeah, React Query is my go-to way of handling state.
Absolutely. And have you ever used, by chance, use SWR at all? It's kind of a similar tool as React Query. Have you used that before?
I've heard of it. I've seen like people use it on tutorials before. I know it's like similar to React Query. Is that something you use over React Query?
So I'm kind of opposite. I've used SWR, but I haven't used React Query. And I know that they're kind of similar things. I was just interested if you've used it and maybe some pros and cons of each to help people decide which one they should use. My understanding of it is React Query might offer like more features than use SWR, and use SWR is maybe a little bit more of a lighter weight package. I could be wrong on this. I haven't used React Query actually, but when using use SWR, I kind of went that route because it's created by the same team that created Next.js. It's created by Vercel. So to me, my guess is that the Vercel team is going to make sure that integrates well with using Next.js and different things like that. So that's kind of why I tend to go that route. But even these days, like with server components, you're able to make a lot of your requests from just within your server components, and that removes a lot of the need for a tool like this. Although, of course, there's still like external APIs or different things that you can kind of use these things for. But I think server components is a really good solution for some of this stuff. And it also kind of, for me anyways, has prevented the need of using a lot of different like use effect hooks and different things like that in my client components. I can now just do a lot of that, just, make those fetch requests right away in my server components and not have to worry about it. But was just interested there if you had any experience with use SWR.
Yeah, exactly. I think you bring up a really good point on the shift from client to server components, and that paradigm shift reducing a lot of need for basically front-end fetching, because usually we use React Query and use SWR because we really need to fetch data from the backend. But with the introduction of server components, you can fetch data directly on your backend, render out the HTML and send it back to your front end. And that actually just reduces a lot of needs for very complex use effect hooks, or even use query managing like your endpoints and stuff. So, and actually another point is that, do you see the difference between use query and use SWR? Two tools are built for the same problem, and that's actually the fascinating world of web development. There's 100 different ways of solving the same problem. Ultimately, it comes down to your familiarity with the tool, how you enjoy the tool, and how it helps you solve the problem. Because at the end, it's really about the developer experience, because they solve the same problem.
Yep, absolutely. And I think these days, a lot of frameworks and different things that you do, it's going to be performant enough to where if it's performant enough for your user and it's solving the same problem, then I think most of the time it comes down to your personal experience with it, what kind of works best for you, and what you kind of get on with is best as possible, and also what kind of your team gets on well with as possible as well. So I think that's really good there as well. And kind of speaking of tools, it looks like in your projects, you've also used things like Tailwind and TypeScript and Prisma. And I'd be interested in, maybe why you've decided to use some of these technologies, or why you kind of like using some of these other technologies within your tech stacks.
That's a good point, because like tech is always changing. A few months back, there was a different tech stack. Maybe next year, next 2 years, the tech stack completely changes. And that's really like both the pain points and also what is fun about web development, right? Like you hear people complaining, tech is changing so fast. I missed out for 2 weeks and now there's a new library out. And so it really comes down to, once you understand the base concepts of certain libraries, the rest are basically the same concepts, just a different syntax, different functions. So I guess it's really up to you. At some point you get so sick of trying to learn the frameworks. At some point you find the perfect tech stack that you feel, well, this is comfortable. I like how it works. It's performant enough, and so you stick with that. So for me, I guess I feel comfortable in the sense that the developer experience is good, it's performant, it's up to date. There are security patches out every few weeks, and so that's how I prefer to choose my tech.
Gotcha. So basically a matter of you know that these technologies are fairly popular. They've got good documentation. They're posting regular updates to it, making sure there's no kind of security vulnerabilities. You're kind of comfortable with the developer experience and that it's plenty performant for you. So I think that's a perfectly reasonable way to kind of go about choosing your tech stack. So maybe it's just one final question here, Elliott. Do you have any general advice to someone starting out, looking to become like as good as they can at web development? Like maybe what has helped you most becoming a web developer? And like you're building some pretty really impressive applications for someone that's 18 years old and like just kind of getting into this. So what kind of advice do you have for someone else looking to do a similar thing?
So thank you for that. I mean, it really comes down to your personal hobby and passion, and it's a very big mindset shift between like programming and even a traditional subject like English, math, or science. It's not something you can really study and like you memorize the syntax, memorize the libraries, and you get it. Because as you said, libraries there's always new libraries, new frameworks, things like that. So the easiest way, honestly, or the way I like to do it, is just to follow tutorials. Follow long form tutorials, because these long form tutorials, they bring you from the start to the end. They talk you through the mindset. They teach you about like authentication structure, best practices, error handling, state management. And the more tutorials you do, the more you realize that there are some common things that these different developers do. And basically your mind picks up on these common patterns. And slowly you start to like, you're able to mix and match different concepts, different like ideas, and you're able to create new projects on your own without needing to follow tutorials anymore. So it took me about 1.5 years to actually get to that stage before I was able to really start building my own projects. And one more thing I would suggest is to join as many hackathons as you can. So as a computer science student, there's always hackathons out there, be it online or in person. It's not only a great way to meet people, but also a great way to experiment with mini projects with new technology stack that you're not used to, because it's a low commitment, just have fun, explore what you like, and that's how you ultimately grow in your career and as a person, doing something that you feel uncomfortable with.
Absolutely. I think that where that real learning happens is when you push yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit and like really try to stretch and run into issues, make mistakes, and then figure out kind of where you went wrong there. And maybe it's just one follow-up question there. A lot of people struggle with this idea of tutorial hell, in which they just keep doing tutorial after tutorial and they kind of code along, but they're really just kind of copying what the instructor is doing on their screen, and they're not actually like learning the different concepts they need to learn to actually go and build their own applications. And they find that they've done all these tutorials, but they actually have a hard time going on and building their own stuff. Is there anything that you did specifically while watching these tutorials that has also helped you kind of go and build your own things? Or what would you maybe recommend to someone in this situation, or to help prevent them from getting in the situation to where they just watch a bunch of tutorials, but they not actually learn the subjects?
Yeah, I remember the tutorial, how it was one of the worst things you could face as a beginner, right? So I guess the common mistake is people copy the code, people follow along, but they do not really truly understand what they're copying, why they're copying. And that's what I found lacking in some tutorials that I looked online. Like, those are outdated, and as they're coding along, it feels like they also don't understand what they're doing. They copied from some code repository, pasted it in, and code it out with you. And therefore, the way I like to approach coding tutorials as I make it is, I like to explain every single concept, why I'm writing this snippet of code. It's not really about how I code, but why I'm doing certain things. And it's very important for me to voice it out to the viewers so that they're able to understand and bring this concept to other projects. And one advice I would give for escaping tutorial hell is to, after doing a few tutorials, come up with the idea that you really want to build. So for me, after learning about the MERN stack, I thought of actually making this platform to connect people who want to play sports together, but they do not have friends. So it was a simple CRUD application, but it forced me to basically look out for certain things into the tutorials that I'm following that will help me accomplish my project. So if you have an end project in mind, when you do these tutorials, you're able to prime your brain to pick up on certain concepts you need down the line. And that's how you actually eventually escape tutorial hell.
I think that's great advice. I think that without ever actually trying to build your own product or projects, it's really hard to have kind of the context and pick up on like little things that you wouldn't have picked up if you weren't trying to also build your own application. And I know when I was first starting out, like going to build my own application, it was like, hard for me to, wrap my head around doing that. But one thing that helped was in tutorials, the instructor might say, okay, now we're going to go build this header component, or we're going to go build this sidebar. And for me, I'd be like, okay, time to pause the tutorial, try to go build this myself first. And then after I go try to do this, then I'll watch the tutorial. I'll pick up on how they did it. And often they did it like in a more better way than I did it. And then I would go refactor, do it that way, and then continue the tutorial. And yes, it definitely makes tutorials last a lot longer and you don't get through them as fast. But I've said this before on podcasts, the goal isn't to just get through as much content as you can and as many tutorials as you can. It's to actually learn the subjects and become a better developer. So I think for me, that was really helpful kind of when starting out. And then from there, going to build my own projects once I got comfortable with kind of doing those little exercises within those tutorials.
Yeah, I think you bring up a very good point that I would add on is that because you have an end project in mind, whenever you're copying like a nav bar, you're basically forced to think about how can you fit that nav bar to your own project. So you're forced to modify it. And when you're forced to modify something, that's where you actually truly learn how the thing actually works under the hood.
Absolutely. Well, I really enjoyed our discussion here, Elliott. I think you have a super bright future ahead of you. I mean, you're absolutely crushing it at 18 years old. Like, I mean, your YouTube channel's doing well. You're definitely a smart guy. So I think you have a really awesome future ahead. So once you completely blow up on YouTube, hopefully you come back to my podcast and can talk about that with me. But yeah, this is a great discussion. If people want to kind of go find you online, find your YouTube channel, where can they kind of go to do that?
I think can just leave a link. Yeah, it's just a link to my channel. But thank you, Ryan, so much for this discussion and this podcast. It feels really nice to discuss these web development topics with a like-minded individual like you.
Awesome. It was my pleasure as well. And thank you so much for coming on today.
No problem.